Welcome back to Racing Rundown. On today's video, we are going to preview the 2022 Belmont Stakes. We've got 8 horses for this. Just a couple PSAs before we get into this. If you are subscribed, you would have seen already, but if you're just tuning in for us for the first time, we do have a additional preview of this race where we were joined by our friend Jay Priven from DRF to talk about this race. So if you want to get his thoughts and him talking to me about this race, you can go check that out. And there will be a link to that below in the description. There will also be a link to the podcast, Racing Rundown podcast, our weekly episodes. So you can go check us out there as well. As I mentioned already, 8 horses for this race. We'll get into all of them in depth, go through our traditional analysis for them. And we're going to start off with the number 1 horse, We the People, in this race, coming out of a victory in the Peter Pan Stakes. I'm going to toss this over to Eric because Eric did some pedigree analysis for We the People on Racing Rundown after he won the Peter Pan. So I'd like you to lead that off so we can get into kind of the big point about We the People, which is, at least from our perspective, which is certainly the pedigree angle.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah, I mean, for one, before we dive into this, I do want to say I've been a big fan of this horse for a very long time. I loved his first 2 races. I thought he was close to a lock, as being a lock without being a lock could be, in the Arkansas Derby, and then, of course, a very nice win last time out in the Peter Pan. But there are things that concern me in terms of the horse himself as we move towards the Belmont Stakes this upcoming weekend. He's bred, by Constitution and out of the Tis Now mare. Those are 2-turn dirt pedigrees right there. But how far he actually wants to go is definitely a concern for me. If you remember Tis the Law, I mean, I'm sure many do, but if you remember his pedigree, he was by Constitution and out of a Tis Now mare. And while Tis the Law was a very talented racehorse, you could just kind of tell he was really his best at about 1 1/8 miles. And he could do 1 1/4 miles. We saw him win the Travers at that distance, but we also saw him in the Kentucky Derby and the Breeders' Cup Classic. It wasn't his ace distance, and certainly any further, you would have had even more worries about his ability the longer the races got. And I get the same vibes from We the People, especially given his win last time out. It was very strong, going 1 1/8 miles. However, 1 1/8 miles around 1 turn is a lot different than 1.5 miles around 2 turns. We'll talk about the pace dynamics, of course, but even if we dive further into the pedigree, beyond the Constitution and the Tis Now, We the People is out of the mare Letchworth. Letchworth never raced. She, was sold well early on in her career, but just ultimately never made the track. But she is out of a mare named Harmony Lodge. Harmony Lodge was a great race mare early in Todd Pletcher's training career, and she was very much so a 1-turn type. She was a Grade 1 winner. She won the Ballerina, the Gallon Bloom, a Grade 2 as well. A couple other really nice stakes throughout her career, but all things considered, was a 1-turn horse, and that was in the early 2000s. So she's obviously had plenty of offspring hit the track, and when you look at them, it's actually really interesting that even when they've been bred to a distance stallion, they don't exactly get long distances very well. I mean, looking through the pedigree, the offspring, there have been some decent runners, nothing really incredible, but the biggest thing about this horse that kind of struck me, maybe he's really not cut out for the distance. You look at one of Harmony Lodge's offspring, a colt named Stratford Hill, by AP Indy, who, of course, a Belmont winner, and he was an excellent racehorse. He won the 2011 Shakertown at Keeneland, but that's a 5-furlong turf race. That's a pure dash down at Keeneland, and even being by AP Indy, but out of a sprinter mare, it ended up making that horse a sprinter. And We the People is clearly not a sprinter, and I know that's a few generations removed, but point is, I still just question his ability to get 1.5 miles. He's clearly a very talented horse. The race will set up well for him, but will he be able to see out the distance better than a few of these other horses that, on paper at least, certainly seem like they will? I'm not so sure.
And that's really the big thing that I want to get into with We the People, is the setup that he's going to get in this race, because he is going to get the perfect setup here. There is no other speed signed on in this race. It's just him and a bunch of closers. There are a couple other horses who may potentially have to be closer to him, but there's not going to be someone up there who's going to want to run with him, not necessarily even stride for stride, but be, I think, within a length of him. So I think you're looking at potentially a length to a length and a half separation between We the People and the rest of the field in this race. And that certainly does mean something. And we've seen horses win Belmont Stakes before, absolutely gifted the lead, that may not have had the pedigree to do it. So that's what makes We the People dangerous here, and why I don't think, even though I don't like him, because I'm also in agreement with Eric, I don't like this horse's ability to be able to see out the distance, but that is certainly dangerous. You hand him an easy lead, which he's going to get, he may potentially not come back to the field, and that's obviously the big danger with him. I'm going to bank on that not happening in here because I do think he's going to take a fair amount of money. He is the morning line favorite. I'm still a little bit doubtful whether or not he goes off as the favorite. We'll see what happens come race time. But I do think that he is going to run through the first mile, maybe even up to a mile and a quarter, very well in this race. And I think you'll just see him in that last quarter of a mile of the race get passed by a couple of the horses here. But I agree with Eric, though. He's a good horse for the summer. Travers definitely could be an option for him, but the Belmont, I think it's just a little bit too much for him. We'll get now to the number 2 horse in this race, Skippylongstocking. If you remember back to our Preakness preview, he was my reach long shot horse in there, and that is what he would be in this race for anybody. Of course, I'm not going to use him in here because I did just kind of play him in the Preakness to see if that could work out. Unfortunately, it did not, and outside of that, I mean, he's just the prototypical plotter that we see all the time in Belmont Stakes races. His form really doesn't give any kind of indication. He was just kind of closing late in the Wood Memorial, but was never going to get anywhere close to the 2 winners, or the winner and the runner-up, Mo Donegal and early voting there. Kind of the same thing in the Preakness. He was closing late, but he was, the better horses were better than him in the race, with the exception of Simplification, but obviously that's a completely different subject there. Point being, I think once again, you're going to see with Skippylongstocking, the better horses are going to be the better horses than him here. He's really, depending on how the betting goes in this race, maybe you throw $1 on him to show, but outside of that, there's not really too much you can do with him.
Pretty much exactly it. He's been decent at times, but when he's won, it's been very much circumstantial. For instance, his last win, 3 starts back at Gulfstream, the only reason he was able to win like he did was because the pace melted down. And then the Wood Memorial, there was a clear top 2, and then he was the best of everybody else. But that's not saying much. And then the Preakness, it was just a flat, even race, and it's really hard to envision a way where he can take the necessary step forward to even get past the 3rd or 4th best horse in this race. So he's racing for minors behind a few other horses, and even then, he's still up against it in a big way.
And now we're going to move on to one of the biggest stories in this race, and that is the filly Nest. If you are a subscriber to Racing Rundown, you've probably already seen the video that I did a few days after the Preakness talking about her potential to win the Belmont. So I'm just going to kind of summarize what I talked about there. The point is that you look at her pedigree. She is bred better than any horse in this race to get the 1.5 miles. And I had been kind of, thinking, she's among the best of them. That is what I had been saying for the last couple of weeks. But I decided that I was going to say yesterday that she is better bred than anybody else in this race to get the 1.5 miles. She's by Curlin out of an AP Indy mare that AP Indy mare, Marion Ravenwood, produced a Grade 1 winner last year in the Santa Anita Handicap Idol. And Nest has been brilliant in every race that she's run in, going 2 turns. So she's going to get the distance here. She's also going to sit a really good trip in the Belmont. There have been so many Belmont winners that have come from that second flight sitting just off the leader trip in past years. The most recent one I can think of is Tappert, but there are plenty others if you go back through the years in the history of the Belmont Stakes. That trip that Nest is going to sit has produced countless Belmont winners. The question is obviously going to be, is she good enough to beat the boys? And I've kind of flip-flopped on how I view Secret Oath, and I'm still not really too sure how to view her. Jay Privman, yesterday on Racing Rundown, took a really positive view of Secret Oath's run in the Preakness, and kind of you can apply that to Nest here. And I would say one thing about Nest, she didn't get the greatest ride in the world in the Kentucky Oaks. Irad Ortiz had an opportunity to save ground in the Oaks, did not, and she gave up ground there, lost by 2 lengths. I have always maintained that Secret Oath was still going to win the Oaks, but I think Nest could have been closer to her than 2 lengths if Irad had decided to save ground off the turn in the Oaks. So, that's certainly one thing. And then you add to that, going 1.25 miles, I think Nest is better than Secret Oath. Going 1.5 miles, absolutely Nest would be better than Secret Oath, but those two are not going to run against each other going 1.5 miles. But the point is here, Nest is on the same level, I think, as Secret Oath. And if Secret Oath is the best 3-year-old filly, and, she gave an okay account of herself in the Preakness, and Nest doesn't have to run against an Epicenter or an early voting here. She does have to run against Mo Donegal, and we'll talk about Mo Donegal a little bit later. But I think that she is probably on talent better than maybe 5 or 6 of the horses in this race, and I probably on the same level as We the People, but she's better than most of the other horses in here. Even, I think you could make a case that she's better than the Kentucky Derby winner, who we'll get to next. But point is that she belongs in this race, absolutely. It's going to be a talent thing of whether or not she's able to beat the boys, but she belongs here. She's got the pedigree to do it. She's going to sit the trip to be able to do it. It's just purely a talent thing. I couldn't pick her on top, but I do think she's going to finish in the money in this race.
She's got a big chance. I mean, you laid it all out there. I think that getting out to 1.5 miles is going to be great for her. I think that when you look at her resume, it stacks up, and I think that while she's probably never going to win the Kentucky Oaks, she could have even finished closer. I thought she could have finished within a length of Secret Oath with a slightly better trip. But she's got a lot of raw ability. She's going to be able to work out. And it's not a huge field, of course, only 7 other opponents, and it's not like there's many horses that'll throw curveballs at her to make her need to work out something. So all things considered, it'll be a race where she's able to run for her best, maximize her ability on the day. And because of that, she has a chance. The talent thing is the big one. Obviously, not being able to beat a Secret Oath and obviously suffering other defeats, even though they weren't at the best distances. Go back to last fall. This is a filly who's really better than a Gerrymander or a Magic Circle, but she wasn't able to beat them. And probably better than Secret Oath, but just wasn't able to beat them. So that's where the problem does come up. Is she better than We the People, Mo Donegal, Rich Strike? It's hard to tell. We have no idea. She could, of course, take the steps forward. But you look at the fillies that run well in Triple Crown races typically, and obviously you go back to the last Belmont winner, they've all had these huge resumes behind them going into it, and that really lifted them to the top, whereas Nest has a lot of catching up to do on that front. That's kind of my biggest thing. She just has to get better, and it's really hard to find a way in which she does get better than those 1, 2, or 3 horses that look better than her on paper.
So now we'll get into the Kentucky Derby winner, Rich Strike. Morning line third choice in this race. I think it's possible that we could see him take some of the casual money in this race. We saw the odds in the Preakness were certainly very odd. I think Rich Strike could potentially be favored here, but I'm not going to project where the betting is going to go in this race because the markets are completely random. So we could see We the People favorite, we could see Mo Donegal favorite, or we could see Rich Strike favorite here. The Kentucky Derby was a good run for him here. It's been talked to death about how he needed everything to go right for him in the Kentucky Derby. But the way that I have chosen to view him, and the way that when we talked to Jay Pribben about him yesterday, that was kind of the same. Jay and I kind of had the same view on him, is that he needed everything to happen for him in the Derby. He needed the pace to fall apart. He needed the ride. He needed to get that. He needed to get the holes to open so he could go up the rail. But he had to do it as well. There's a big difference. There have been plenty of horses that have run races in the Kentucky Derby like Rich, or have gotten trips like Rich Strike, but they didn't win the Kentucky Derby. And not only did Rich Strike win the Kentucky Derby, he beat Epicenter, the best 3-year-old colt, and Zandon, who is probably in most people's potential top 5. So he beat 2 of the top 5 3-year-olds in the process of doing that. So that certainly counts for something. And, listening to Eric Reed yesterday at the post draw, he talked about how he thought that the horse really improved going from the synthetic to the dirt. Now, how much does that... do you want to put into that? I'm not really too sure, but it certainly did help him. And you do have to also realize is that he was begging for more ground in his races. You go back and you look at the Ruby, he certainly wanted more ground there. The Kentucky Derby was always going to be a good spot for him if he could have been able to get in. And, obviously can't expect him to have won the race, but it makes sense that he would have been one of those horses closing there. And obviously when you throw in, so he was going to close anyway, and then you throw in the pace falling apart in the Kentucky Derby, it makes sense why he was a board hitter. Now, again, I said he was going to be a board hitter. I did not think he was going to win the race, but again, Rich Strike is a good horse. I think you have to view him at that certain level. He is good. I don't think he's 100% a fluke. However, he's got to answer some questions here. He's not going to get the pace falling apart in the Kentucky Derby, or in the Belmont that he got in the Kentucky Derby. And then the other thing about him is that he's going to have to run down horses in a race that is not necessarily the best setting up for him. We the People is going to be tripping out here. Mo Donegal has a really good kick. You saw the kick that he had in the Wood. Rich Strike is going to have to produce something I think better than his Kentucky Derby run to be able to win this race. I'm not sure that it's going to come here, and I think given the money that he's liable to take, I'd rather throw my money elsewhere. But I would be really nice to see him win the Belmont Stakes. These connections certainly are people who you would feel good for getting another Triple Crown win in him. And Rich Strike is good. That's the thing about him. He's not 100% fluke. I don't think you can completely dismiss him as that. I ultimately am not going to pick him in my trifecta, but that's just because I'm trying to manufacture some value in there. But it would make sense for him to hit the board here. I say that it is like it's a super out there thing. It's an 8-horse field, so it's very difficult to not hit the board in this race.
He's going to run well, I think. Of the 8 horses in this field, he's probably second or third most likely to just put on a good performance, in my opinion. The Derby was a huge win. It was a huge win, obviously very unexpected, but at the same time, it made sense in a lot of ways. And I think the biggest thing is the 1.5 miles. He's a big, loping horse, huge, sturdy physical on him. Those are the kinds of horses that the further they get to go, the better off they'll be. We'll talk about that more with Mo Donegal, of course, but this is another one that really fits that bill. He might be lacking in the talent department, but he'll see out this 1.5 miles beautifully. And I think he does not need to be 1,000 lengths off the pace, right? He does not need to be last, in my opinion, if he doesn't want to. He probably will be because that's been his style, but I genuinely don't think he needs to be a one long run horse in a 1.5 mile race. He can sit a bit closer going these distances. Once again, don't know if that'll be the case, but point being, I think that there are ways to put him in the best position to win. That might be laying him just a little closer, 5th or 6th still, but just not way out the back. But I think he's going to run well. I'd be more surprised to see him up the track than I would be to see him in contention towards the end. I think he has things to do in terms of his overall ability, and I don't think that'll obviously be remedied over the next few days leading up to the Belmont, but he's going to put in a good account of himself.
And now we're going to move on to the number 5 horse here, which is another one that I think is going to be one of those sit closer horses, and that is the 3rd place finisher in the Preakness, Creative Minister, my pick in the race. Creative Minister ran a really good race in the Preakness. He was stepping up from Allowance Company going into the Preakness, and he gave a good account of himself here. He was well beaten by the 2 best horses in there, Early Voting and Epicenter, but he did finish in front of Secret Oath, and it was a good effort considering he was jumping up from Allowance Company into the Preakness. Ken McPeak is very high on this horse. Once again, I don't know if it was something that was caught on the post draw yesterday at Belmont, but being at the post draw, Ken McPeak was talking about how the owner of Creative Minister wanted to run him in the Pat Day Mile as opposed to in that allowance race. Ultimately, they didn't do that, probably for the benefit of the horse, but that's completely besides the point. Good run in the Preakness. I think he could sit closer. You saw Brian Hernandez move him. I don't want to say, right, I don't want to give the wrong context with this. He moved him early on in the race. I'm not saying that as if it was a mistake or anything. He moved him earlier in the race than other riders moved their horses. So I could see Creative Minister be that horse that's sitting second. I've been trying to figure out who's going to be that horse to sit second and third. I think Nest is going to be on the inside sitting second or third, but I think Creative Minister is a horse that I would say early on in the race could be the one that's sitting second here. So if he is going to see out the trip, which I don't know how well he's going to see out the 1.5 miles, I think he could. I'm not going to put my money on him winning the race or anything like that, but I think he could run decent here. But I think early on in the race, you'll see him more involved he's more likely to be involved than some of the other horses. And like I said, I really think he'll be that horse to sit second off of We the People. He's another one that I think this might be a bit too much too soon for. The Preakness wasn't a bit too much too soon, but I think the Belmont might be. But later on in the summer, I think that this is a horse that could factor in some major graded stakes races. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him take out a major graded stakes win. I just don't think that this is the time for it.
Me neither. I think that he ran huge in the Preakness, but at the same time, he was clearly third best, and I think that some of the better horses in this Belmont are better than the best in the Preakness, and that's kind of where I'm skeptical he can take the necessary step forward required to win this race. I also think that, normally I'm not opposed to a horse running 3 times in 5 weeks, but I think when you are taking the leaps that this horse has been taking, in the past 2 months, really. I mean, this will be his fourth race in 2 months. He broke his bait in April, won the first, the one other than in May, then ran in the Preakness, and now he's here. That's a lot. That's a lot on a young horse. If this was a horse that had been cranking out graded stakes from early in his 2-year-old year, then I would have been like, yeah, he's ready for this. I don't care that this is his fourth race in 2 months, third race in 5 weeks. But when it comes to a horse like this, so light on experience and seasoning, and in addition to the other factors, I just don't really see it happening.
And now we're going to move on to number 6 in this race, Mo Donegal, who is going to be my pick in the Belmont Stakes. Mo Donegal has just been a horse that I have gotten so much respect and admiration for him over the course of the winter and going into the Kentucky Derby. Again, if you remember, he was a maiden watch horse, so Racing Rundown has been a believer in Mo Donegal for a very long time. I said after the Holy Bull, and we made this point to death on the road to the Kentucky Derby, but he ran a winning race there, and I said after the Holy Bull that, not after the Holy Bull, excuse me. I said when he scratched out of the Fountain of Youth that was a very good thing for him because the Wood Memorial was going to be the race for him. After the Wood Memorial, obviously, he goes into the Kentucky Derby, and he got a good trip for the first maybe about 3/4 to 7/8 of a mile in the Kentucky Derby. And then the phrasing that I've been using for the last 3 weeks to describe what happened in the Kentucky Derby is Irad Ortiz, first of all, he let Rich Strike get first run on him, which was a mistake in that instance. They were at about the same point in the race, and Rich Strike moved first, and then Mo Donegal moved afterwards. And the phrasing that I've been using is Irad zagged when Sonny Leon zigged. And that's why you saw Rich Strike winning the Kentucky Derby and Mo Donegal being in the parking lot running 5th, giving up a ton of ground in the Kentucky Derby. And I think Mo Donegal wins the Derby if he gets that Rich Strike trip. He ran very well with being as wide as he was. He also initiated a little bit of contact with Barber Road. I don't think that affected him too much, but certainly is something to think about there. And like I said, if he had gotten that Rich Strike trip, I think he wins the Kentucky Derby. And he is a horse that has been crying out for more distance. You just look at the way he runs his races. The Remsen and the Wood Memorial, he was a tried and true 2-turn horse. And that's why, even though he was favored, that's why we didn't like him in the Holy Bull, because we knew that he was going to need 1 1/8 and longer. And the way that he won the Wood Memorial, I thought it was extremely impressive. And a lot of people have made the point that, yeah, well, he got a perfect rail trip there. Sure, but early voting got a perfect on the lead. The race was handed to him. He tripped out, and Mo Donegal had to run him down on the spot, which he did. And that is the big thing. That kick that he showed in the Wood Memorial is the reason why I like Mo Donegal very much in this Belmont Stakes, because I think the lead that We the People is going to get is very similar to the lead that early voting got in the Wood Memorial. You remember Morello stumbled there, and early voting was able to trip out on the lead. No one else there in the Wood Memorial. But Mo Donegal had that kick late to run by him. And I think you're going to see that late kick again in the Belmont. He's not going to have traffic trouble here like he did in the Kentucky Derby. And the other thing, Todd Pletcher, there is nobody better in the business than Todd Pletcher going Derby to Belmont that 5-week stretch, taking a horse that didn't win the Kentucky Derby, and then in 5 weeks having them ready to win the Belmont. It just makes sense with Mo Donegal. Everything lines up for him, and I think he's going to run a huge race here, and it's going to be good enough to win the Belmont Stakes.
100%. That's why I'm on him too. I think it was back in January or February, before he even ran in the Holy Bull, I was saying, I'd just like to see this horse get prepped for the Belmont, not even try the Kentucky Derby, because he's built for this race. And I think that you just look at him and he's a Belmont horse. Physically, he moves like a horse that's going to relish this distance, and he runs like one too. I mean, it's not atypical for people to latch onto a horse that was making up a lot of ground late in the Kentucky Derby, but he's just always been gritty. He's always been good, and he's kept the toughest of competition from the day he set foot on the track. I mean, he's not faced a bad horse in his 6 career starts to this point, and this will be 7 straight races where he's been tested or having to run against tested animals. So all things considered, I think he's got a huge chance to – he has things to overcome. There's not a lot of speed. But I also think a big thing is he can be tactical. Go back to his win in the Remsen, go back to his maiden win even, and you realize that, he doesn't need to be far out the back. He can be mid-pack if he wants to be. In the Remsen, he was within 2-3 lengths of the lead at all times. Or once again, go back to the Belmont maiden win last October. It was going a mile and 16th. That was one turn, and those races often run more like a sprint. And he was well within striking distance throughout. He was engaged on the bridle, in contention every step of the way. So once again, I don't think he needs to be, 15, 20 lengths back like he was in the Kentucky Derby. He can be fourth or fifth, couple lengths off of the people if he wants to. I think I'm honestly expecting Ira Ortiz to employ those tactics. He's ridden him in those impressive races that he was able to sit closer. And once again, I don't think he thinks the horse needs to be last. In the Derby, it was very smart to be there because I think he knew the pace was going to be hot. From the rail draw, you really had no choice. Whereas this time around, you're going to be able to work out whatever trip you want. And I think that trip will be sitting mid-pack within striking distance and then just making a nice run commencing at the 3/8 pole and taking the lead down the lane and winning the Belmont.
And now we'll move on and talk about the number 7 horse here, Golden Glider, the co-longest shot on the board in this race, and with good reason. He doesn't really have any form that indicates that he is going to run well in this race. I thought his best run to date was the Bluegrass, but he was convincingly beaten by the top 3 in that race, Zandon, Smile Happy, and Emmanuel. And outside of that, I mean, yeah, Ethereal Road ran okay in winning the Sir Barton on Preakness Day, but Golden Glider doesn't really have any really strong form coming into this race. He's just kind of one of those typical filler horses. You could make the case, well, Cassie ran second with Sir Winston in the Peter Pan in 2019 and then was able to siphon that into a Belmont Stakes win. But Sir Winston was a lot better than Golden Glider was, and Golden Glider was beaten 10 lengths in that Peter Pan Stakes. And, as much as Sir Winston was, he was better in his Peter Pan than Golden Glider was. And Golden Glider is just a long shot in this race. There's no real reason that he should jump up and win here. Like I said, just kind of a filler in this race.
Yeah, he does not have much of a chance, in my opinion. I think there's no angle to move him up. You think about long shot winners, Mark Cassidy, his Belmont winner, Sir Winston. You just knew he was going to get better with the added ground. This is not one of those horses. If anything, he was one that benefited from that Peter Pan being one turn, going a mile and an eighth, and then you laid out all the other horses that he's been beaten by and soundly beaten by on top of that. I mean, I'm not going to give you much for losing to Classic Causeway and then finishing fourth in the Bluegrass, beaten about 7 lengths. Just nothing to like here.
And now we're going to move on to the last horse in this Belmont Stakes, and that is Barber Road. And Eric kind of talked about that horse, that closer from the Derby that people latch on to, and that was Barber Road going into the Kentucky Derby. I haven't really seen the talk on Barber Road that I saw on him going into the Kentucky Derby, but that doesn't mean that there aren't people out there who might think, okay, well, he's been placing in just about every race, and he might need more ground, and the Belmont might be the place for him. Barber Road's just not good. That's the point. The Arkansas road to the Kentucky Derby Trail was really bad. He was losing to bad horses there. He was always going to pick up a piece of something in the Kentucky Derby. So running 6th there was, somewhat expected given that the pace was going to melt down. But this was a horse who, if you were in any circles in racing going into the Kentucky Derby, he was a lock to hit the board, and he was certainly not a board hitter here, or a board hitter in the Kentucky Derby. Yeah, he ran good, but he underwhelmed given the expectations that had been set for him. The other thing about Barber Road is he is going to be last. That is the thing. He has just been a dead closer his entire career. He's a plotter more so than anything else, and maybe that's good enough to get him 4th here, but I don't see him finishing any better than 4th in this race, and I'm going to take the stand that he's not going to hit the board here because he's just not good enough to do so.
I agree. I honestly think Joel Rosario, he rides the Belmont very well every time he's allowed to run in it. So I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to put the horse more in the game. I don't know how effective it'll be, but he could try. He's had races where he wasn't the last horse in the race, but at the same time, it's a talent thing, and I don't really know if he has it. There's, once again, not many angles that suggest improvement. He's only every single loss down in Arkansas was to a horse that did not run well in the next start. I don't know if the pattern will follow necessarily here with Rich Strike coming from the Derby here to the Belmont, but I think that just kind of is the overriding theme with Barber Road is he can't beat horses who can't beat other good horses, which means, he probably can't win this race himself.
And now we're going to move on to our picks for the Belmont Stakes. Obviously, as I already said, I'm picking Mo Donegal here. I like to do some kind of a little trifecta here. I'm leaving out Rich Strike and We the People just because I'm trying to make a little bit of money here. If we're picking this clearly 100% logically, those are the clear top 3. But I'm going to play the Pletcher Exacta here with Mo Donegal on top of the filly. And then for a little bit of value in here, I'll sneak in Creative Minister. Maybe he picks up 3rd here. Again, if you are tuning in after listening to our episode of Racing Rundown this week, there's not a whole lot of money to be made on this card in general. You got to try to find something here. We're going to be picking a lot of short price favorites, so we got to find something here. So that's how I'm going to try to manufacture something. It's probably a reach, but that's what I usually tend to do with these trifectas here.
And for me, Mo Donegal on top. I felt pretty confident for months now. This was his race to win, and now that he's here against this field, it makes a lot of sense to me. I think Rich Strike runs well, hits the board, and I think Ness does as well. I think that's a logical top three for me.
And with that being mentioned, that's it for our Belmont Stakes preview. Be sure to tune into everything that we have on Racing Rundown this week, our Belmont preview with Jay Pribben, and episode 162 of Racing Rundown, where we will go through the full card for the Belmont Stakes Festival with races on Thursday as well as Friday and Saturday. Have a